Hey, everybody, this is episode 99. We're going to talk about don't turn the channel. We're going to talk about customer acquisition costs. Actually, it's one of my least favorite topics and one of the most favored statistics you can get about your business. We're going to explain what CAC is, customer acquisition costs, how it's calculated, and why it matters for your business. We also walk through several practical ways to lower your CAC and why you should know it across all your advertising methods. In addition, we're comparing CAC to lifetime value so you understand how these two numbers work together and why your LTV should always be several times higher than the cost to acquire a customer or your CAC. We close the episode with average CAC numbers from common industries. This is a simple and helpful introduction to a metric that can completely change how you manage your marketing budget. He's Matt Hansen. I'm Jim Deedlow. Hey, Matt. Hey, well, I know you want to tell a little story about, I want to talk about CAC and what it means to the average business. Matt is the academic, and I sit here and run these, practical two companies. But we stay away from CAC, and a lot of times people that have a high CAC don't want to look at that. But tell us about your graduate CAC story.
Yeah, so I was in charge of our graduate program for about a year and a half, and we started to do some marketing work on it. And of course, nobody had looked at the marketing numbers to really understand what it was all about. So the first question I had was, how many dollars is it going to take to put a butt in a seat, is the way I put it, right? So what is is it going to cost us $100? Is it going to cost us $500? Is it going to cost $1,000? What does it cost to put somebody into an enrolled seat? So I made a phone call. I had a friend of mine that I had graduated with years ago that worked in the industry and basically asked, friendly favor, can you kind of give me a rough estimate of what that number would look like? So from a public institution versus a private institution. So he came back, and it was a lot more than I actually thought it was going to be, which you talk about. Most people don't realize that your customer acquisition cost is much higher than you think it will be. So when I say that, and I forget the exact number at this point, but let's say it was about $2,000 to put, as I say, a butt in a seat for a public institution on a grad program. When you look at the private sector, right, so private institution, it was well over $10,000 to put somebody into that seat. So, do the math there, and you start to look at it, and you realize it's pretty expensive. Now, why would I want to know that? Well, because we were looking at allocating dollars towards marketing, and we were looking at, if we wanted to get X number of students into our program in the next year, what would that cost us, right? So let's say that we wanted to put 100 students get 100 students into the program next year. We knew we had to spend 100 times 2,000, right? Customer acquisition cost. That's what it would cost to put that many new students into our program. So the way we actually did it was we had a budget that was allocated, and then we divided that number into it to understand, okay, we should expect this many students coming in. Now, I know I've said a lot there, but what I'm saying is if you understand your customer acquisition cost, whether it's $2,000 or whether it's $50, the way that we look at that is if I'm spending this money to drive a customer in here, hopefully we're making more in the lifetime value of our customer, the LTV, than we are spending on the customer acquisition cost, right? So again, marketing is full of acronyms. CAC is customer acquisition cost, how much it costs for you to get a customer. LTV is the lifetime value of your customer. And looking at those two is really important.
What is there's all sorts of benchmarks for different industries. We'll get to those on what the CAC should be, but in relation to your long-term value, I already know the answer to this because I took your class, but what is the relationship, the ratio from CAC to LTV? What should be the range?
Yeah, at the minimum, I would say a 3-to-1 ratio. So if it costs you $50 to get a customer, obviously you would want to pull in $150 lifetime value. I've seen as 1 to 4, 1 to 3, whatever it may be, but ideally you want it much bigger than that. You want to find customers that keep coming back, spending more money. I've worked with some pretty significant large clients, and I don't want to call them out here, but when you look at the lifetime value of certain customers, you expect it to be really a lot higher in some instances. And I had one that was literally their lifetime value was 300, and I think it was 60 some dollars lifetime value. And we were sending emails and we were doing all this other stuff, and the opt-outs alone were outperforming. So if you took the opt-outs, the number of people that opt out of the email that they were sending times the lifetime value versus the people that were spending money, the opt-outs were actually much higher than what they were pulling in revenue. So, the customer acquisition cost and the lifetime value, they all tie together. But these are numbers that you have to really understand. And a lot of people out there are probably going, well, how do I calculate this? All of that, right? So it's literally the expenses that go into getting your customer divided by the number of customers that you get, right? So if I go out there and I say, well, I'm going to run a TikTok advertising campaign and I'm going to spend, $2,000. You should be able to tie the number of customers that came back to that. So you're basically taking that $2,000 and dividing it by, let's say you get 10 customers or 100 customers, whatever it is, and that's how you calculate it. But most people don't look at their advertising this way, right? They'll go out, they'll spend $500, and they never look at the numbers. They never calculate, the customer acquisition costs here, and they're just throwing money at the wall and hoping something sticks. What we're saying today is sit down. Every time you put money into a platform, if you're putting $1,000 into TikTok or $1,000 in Instagram or Google paid search or whatever it is, sit down and figure out a way that you can actually tie that $1,000 or that $2,000 to specific customers, and you'll understand what your customer acquisition cost is.
So there's a lot of variables here, but the main thing is just take the expense to get your customer and divide it by the number of customers. Now, the number of customers can be fairly straightforward unless you basically have a bifurcated system where you have real customers and then you kind of have stragglers that will be very low spenders, and then you got to decide, do you really include them in the entire number of customers? But it's the expenses to get customers that I remember from your classes where you kind of put it on, I don't know if it was a final, but it was a challenge to get the expenses. I mean, you don't just take your whole amount of expenses of the whole company.
No.
You have to narrow it down to what?
To the individual purchases, the individual things that you're doing. So if you're running, from a small retailer perspective, if you're sending out postcards to to a new list, right? People that aren't customers, and that postcard comes back in with some kind of discount code or redemption for a free giveaway or something like that. You should be tracking all of that back to that postcard. So I send out, let's say, 5,000 postcards to an area that we've never sent to before. 100 postcards come back, and we tie that to the revenues that are generated, right? So that, okay, 5,000 went out, maybe 50 people came in, right? We spent this much on those postcards. We divide that by the 50 people that came in and became customers. I mean, that's your customer acquisition cost. It's as simple as that, and you have to do that for every single purchase that you do in marketing. You have to understand these things. And the reason that I'm saying that is because when somebody like myself comes in and we start to look at companies, many times they're underperforming. Right? They're just doing things. And one of the case studies that I love to tell about is we had a company that we were working with, and they were producing, they were growing 1% every single year, and we did a customer acquisition cost study on all of the things that they were doing. So they were doing a ton of direct mail at that point. We looked at every single list that they had to understand how well it was performing. So we did a customer acquisition cost based on list A, B, C, D. And when we started to go back out with new mailers and things like that, we looked at the customer acquisition cost and went from the cheapest to the most expensive. And when we ran out of money, that's when we stopped. So there were lists that were no longer getting messaging out there because we knew it was too expensive to go after that list, right? Because in recent, obviously things that we had learned through the data analytics. So what you're looking for is the cheapest way possible to get a customer. And when you lay all of that out in front of you, if I could create the perfect visual for you, if I could put TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Google display, Google paid search, even Yahoo paid search, right? Like Pinterest ads, LinkedIn ads, billboards, newspaper, radio, all of those things, if I could put those all on a board in front of you and say, here's your customer acquisition cost for each and every one of these, then you could hand select and literally go through it and say, okay, well, let's start with the cheapest and let's work our way up until our budget is gone. And I think nobody thinks about it this way unless you are, that top level marketer at a major company. But what I'm saying is most of the people that are listening to this may be doing 2, 3, 4 different things. Start to look at it and go, all right, what do we spend? Can we track the customers? And then let's run it again and test it and test it and test it. And then you get a better feel for what works, what doesn't, what costs you a ton of money, and what doesn't.
All right, so let's go through how this relates to conversion. Or, we've already kind of gone deeper into customer acquisition costs and lifetime value is deeper than we normally do on conceptual stuff, but this is a very important one. Let's go back to making sure that all of the cost of your marketing and to acquire a customer, what other than mailers, do you take a portion of the executive secretary? Do you take a portion of taking people out to eat? What do how do you bring all of those costs in?
I mean, you could pull in your overhead costs as well, but odds are they're fixed costs. They're already being paid. So the way that I like to look at it is the variable cost. So if we open the doors today, we're still paying our employees, we're still paying the light bills, we're still paying, rent or whatever. All of that is going to be paid regardless. So you can't really tie that back to a customer acquisition cost. From a variable cost perspective, you can do the Facebook ad or the Instagram ad or any of these different things, or you cannot, and it's not going to necessarily change the day-to-day operations of what's going on. So what I like to say is look at the ad dollars that you're putting into it. If you're hiring a designer to do something, if you're hiring somebody to do video, those are all variable costs based on what you're doing here, right? That's the way I would look at it. I wouldn't tie in the overhead to it. So
you're and let's just be straight on the fixed versus variable. You should have an understanding of that in your business. But the variable cost of, you're going to have some costs that you have to shade from, you got to say, is that operations? Mm-hmm. What if you're looking at the business, all right, they got their fixed costs. How many columns do you like on a variable cost level?
I think it all depends. Every business is different, but you're talking about overhead, right? So let's say you've got, Hunter sitting in the other room and he's working on marketing and you're saying, okay, we're going to run an ad campaign to drive new business, or he's going to be doing some kind of email reach out. If he spends 3 hours this week out of his entire hours, and then you look at the large over time, what percentage of that? Sure, you could allocate those dollars, right? So whatever you're paying him per hour, or whatever, however that works out.
On top of the cost for the design and implementation of the Facebook ad.
Right. And I think customer acquisition costs are actually coming down. I think the biggest thing to understand, I was playing around last night. I don't. Have you ever checked out Google Labs?
I use Google Gemini, and they keep bringing a pop up. Hey, go over here, check out Google Labs. I have
Yeah.
not hit the link.
I think I was like 3 hours into it last night, but they have this thing, I forget what it's called. It's skipping my mind, but they have this thing now where literally you put in your website and it will go grab all of your fonts, your logo, your imagery. It'll create brand colors for you. It'll create your mission. And then you hit one button and it will create a campaign for you. And it'll do both static and video. And it was really cool. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking about, we're talking about customer acquisition costs today. And people that want to spend hours and hours and hours doing design work at this point, I literally clicked 3 buttons and there was a campaign that I could literally download and put out there on any of the social channels. Like it gave me options. Do you want it this ratio? You want it this ratio? Do you want to animate this? You hit animate and 3 minutes later it's animated the static image. I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like, customer acquisition cost is coming down lower and lower and lower. So if you understand what that cost is and you can compare it to that LTV, that difference, that 3-to-1, that 4-to-1 that we were talking about earlier, is actually getting much wider, which is great, right? Like you're having the ability to make more money on some of the things that you're doing. So, whether it's variable cost, whether it's fixed cost, going back to the question, I think you can allocate whatever you want to allocate. Customer acquisition cost is open to interpretation. If I'm spending money on design work, if I'm spending money on mailing, if I'm spending printing, if I want to include my time, we've talked a lot about time on this and how much an hour of your time is worth, right? So if I'm going to sit down, I'm going to spend 3 hours on this, what do I value my time at? That's got to be included as well. So it's open to interpretation, but I guess the point of what we're trying to get across today is most people don't even look at it.
So let's use a couple of benchmarks. Real estate, to get a lead for either a buyer or seller, what's a good benchmark?
Yeah, I was looking these up yesterday, and what I found was they had $226 as a customer acquisition cost for real estate, right? So that sounds like a lot, but when you figure that you're selling a home, that you are taking a nice little commission off of that, would you pay $226 to pull in a couple $1,000s or even more?
No,
right?
I think I saw that the median home price is inching up towards 400,000.
Yep.
So let's say at 400,000, say you get at least a 4% on that. So that's you're getting a $16,000 commission on a $226 spend.
Right.
Of course, you've got all the costs of selling it and your own time and all that, but the actual getting that customer was $226.
But see, going into that, right? So customer acquisition costs, you said what goes into that? We're talking about could be the ad dollars, could be the time spent, could be gas, could be your car. Like there's all these things that go into. So it's not just the ad dollars that go into it. It's the time, the effort, if I'm driving, as a real estate agent, you're driving to meet all of these people at different homes. So, I don't know what the national, tax per mile is right now, but if you're talking 67 cents or whatever it is at this point per mile, and you put in 30 miles or 20 miles over time to get for that one customer, I mean, that should be included with your customer acquisition cost.
We talk about my buddy who has the HVAC firm, and he's mostly word of mouth, but he still does a little bit of advertising. What should he expect to spend on each customer?
Yeah, I saw this at 98. So,
that's about what I would have guessed,
yeah,
$100.
I mean, HVAC, you're spending what? Anywhere between, at this point, $8,000 all the way up. I mean, those things have gotten pretty pricey over the last couple of years. So it's
financial services.
I mean, financial services are interesting. $173 is what we have, but there's a ton of money. Again, you got to look at it from the lifetime value of a customer, right? So if some people will look at that and go, oh, $173 to get a new customer, no way. But they don't compare it to the lifetime value and say, well, am I making $5,000? Am I making $3,000? Am I making $300,000?
Well,
I don't know.
in their case, you're talking 3 to 4. So if they're spending $173, you could expect in maybe a $600 to $700 per client.
Yeah.
So what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that if you are not measuring your business in these simple metrics, you are throwing money away. You don't understand. You're making the wrong decisions. It's like you're starting your business from day one every single time you spend money. So if you're like, well, let's go do a campaign. Well, you don't even know what works best because you haven't tracked anything, right? So I've been part of small businesses and I've been part of big businesses, and this is not tracked by both of them. And really, smart marketers, smart business owners will sit down and start to look at this and go, okay, if I spend $1,000 here, if I spend $1,000 there, which is the better return? And at what point does one start to shift towards the other one, right? So if you understand customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to make bigger money.
Episode 99, customer acquisition costs and lifetime value. Until next time, we'll see you later.